Adam Reed stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the vast emptiness of space stretch out ahead like a dark ocean with no end. The fleet he commanded was called the Light of Mercy, and it carried one purpose only: to heal. Behind his ship were dozens of medical transports, each one filled with wounded soldiers, injured civilians, and doctors who had come from many worlds. No weapons were mounted on those ships. There were only medical bays, life support systems, and emergency shelters. The mission was simple, but it meant everything to those on board. They were moving through neutral space, a region of the galaxy where no warships were supposed to fire, no empires were supposed to fight. It was a rule agreed on by many civilizations long ago. Adam Reed believed in that rule, even if others sometimes broke it. He had seen too much war in his life to ignore the importance of mercy. On one of the main medical ships, Dr. Sarah Hale moved quickly through a long white corridor filled with soft light. The air smelled clean, almost too clean, like everything had been scrubbed away except pain and hope. She stopped at each room, checking patients of different species. Some had burns from plasma weapons, others had broken limbs from falling debris, and some were too weak even to speak. Sarah spoke gently as she worked. She did not care where the patients came from. Some were human, others were alien soldiers who had once fought against humanity. In her eyes, pain was the same in every body. A hand that trembled meant fear. A quiet breath meant hope. She treated them all as if they mattered, because to her, they did. Word had spread across the fleet that humans were different. Not weak, not soft, but different in how they chose to help even those who had once been enemies. Alien nurses and medics worked alongside humans, learning new methods and sharing their own. Slowly, trust began to grow. Conversations that once stopped when humans entered now continued freely. On the bridge of his ship, Adam Reed watched all of this with quiet pride. He knew the galaxy was not kind. He knew there were empires that saw mercy as a mistake. But he also believed that every act of healing was a step away from endless war. His fleet was proof that peace was still possible, even in a universe filled with old hatred. He checked the navigation display again. The route was clear. No hostile signatures. No warnings. Just silence. That silence should have been comforting, but something in it felt wrong. Adam had learned long ago that silence in space sometimes meant danger hiding just beyond sight. Maintain formation, he said calmly into the communication channel. His voice was steady, but his eyes stayed sharp. The fleet adjusted slightly, staying close together. The medical ships moved like a slow, careful river of light drifting through darkness. Inside the convoy, life continued normally. Children from alien species played in recovery rooms. Doctors shared notes and tools. Some patients even stood near observation windows to look at the stars, as if the beauty of space could help them forget their pain. Sarah Hale paused for a moment, watching a small alien child sleep peacefully for the first time in days. That moment meant more to her than any award or title. Then everything changed. It began with a flicker in the distance. A distortion in space that should not have been there. Adam Reed noticed it first. His eyes narrowed as multiple sensors began to fail at once. One by one, silent warnings appeared across his screen. Energy signatures rising. Unknown vessels approaching. Fast. Shields, he started to say, but stopped. There were no shields. The convoy was not armed. That was the point. They were protected only by law and trust. Or so they believed. A moment later, ships began to appear. They came out of stealth like predators stepping out of shadow. Dark warships with sharp edges and no visible markings surrounded the convoy from multiple directions. Their arrival was not random. It was precise. Planned. Coordinated. Adam Reed's face tightened, but he did not panic. Open all channels, he ordered. Identify ourselves. Medical convoy under neutral protection. This is a humanitarian fleet. There was no response. Instead, weapon systems on the enemy ships powered up. Bright lines of energy formed along their hulls like glowing scars. On the medical ship where Sarah Hale worked, alarms suddenly filled every corridor. Patients woke in confusion. Doctors looked up from their work, unsure what was happening. Sarah stepped into the corridor and felt the entire ship shake slightly. She looked at the ceiling lights flickering above her head. For a moment, she thought it might be a system error. Then she saw the red warning lights turn on. Outside the window, space itself seemed to ignite. The first beam struck the convoy's outer ship without warning. There was no demand, no negotiation, no signal. Just destruction. The medical vessel erupted into light and silence as its shields, non-existent, failed instantly. Metal folded. Rooms vanished. Entire sections of the ship disappeared in a flash that lit up the darkness like a brief star born and dying at once. Sarah stumbled as the ship rocked violently. Emergency systems screamed around her. People were thrown to the ground. Patients cried out in fear. She rushed toward them, trying to keep them calm, trying to keep them alive, even as the floor beneath her feet began to tremble again. On Adam Reed's bridge, the situation turned into chaos within seconds. Reports came in from every direction. Medical ships under attack. Escape pods destroyed. Communications jammed. The convoy was being erased piece by piece. He finally saw the enemy command signature. One name appeared across intercepted signals: Varkrath Dominion forces. They had broken neutral law. They had chosen to strike at a healing fleet. Adam Reed's expression changed slowly. Not into panic. Not into rage. Into something colder. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if making a decision that would never be undone. "Send the final emergency beacon," he said quietly. A technician hesitated. "Sir, they are jamming all transmissions." Adam looked at him. "Send it anyway." The message went out. It was short. A broken signal of distress, recorded from dying ships and fading lives. It carried one truth across the void before it was cut off. Then silence returned again. But this time, it was not peace. It was aftermath waiting to become something far worse. And in the distance, as the convoy burned, Adam Reed opened his eyes and said nothing at all. The signal arrived at Earth like a dying breath carried across impossible distance. It was broken, incomplete, filled with static and fragments of panic. But the meaning was clear enough. Ships marked with the light of mercy had been attacked. Medical vessels had been destroyed. People who had gone to heal others were now gone. In the main communications center of Earth, the room fell completely silent as the message ended. No one spoke at first. The officers who had spent their lives handling reports of piracy, border disputes, and small wars now stared at the screen without moving. Some replayed the signal again, hoping they had misunderstood it. They had not. Adam Reed's voice was not there. Dr. Sarah Hale's voice was not there. Only fragments remained. Screams cut off in mid-breath. Alarms that ended too soon. And then nothing. Somewhere deep inside the building, Ambassador Paul Grant stood still as the recording finished for the third time. He was a calm man by nature, trained to speak across languages, cultures, and conflicts. His job was to stop wars before they began. He had done it many times before. But not like this. He lowered his head slightly and took a slow breath. Around him, advisors were already speaking in urgent tones, suggesting responses, offering negotiations, preparing statements. But Paul raised one hand, and they fell silent. "We will respond through diplomacy," he said quietly. His words were steady, but they felt strange even to him. Diplomacy was built on the idea that both sides could still be reasoned with. But something inside him already knew that this time, reason had been ignored long before Earth ever heard about it. Still, he followed procedure. Messages were prepared. Channels were opened. Neutral systems were contacted. Demands for explanation were drafted carefully. Words like violation, protected convoy, and war crime were included. But even as those messages were sent, something unusual began happening. Across Earth's orbit, small signals began to activate. At first, they were unnoticed. Old relay stations waking from deep standby. Communication buoys shifting their power levels. Mining platforms adjusting course. Nothing dramatic. Just background systems returning to life. Then the military alarms began. In ocean-based facilities beneath Earth's surface, sealed doors opened for the first time in decades. Water pressure shifted as massive hangars unlocked. Inside them, ships that had not moved in years began to power up. Their hulls were dark, but not dead. They had been waiting. In the Arctic regions, buried under ice and stone, another fleet stirred. Systems that had been designed in silence for emergencies came alive. Engines that had never been tested in real war began running through full diagnostics. In space, hidden stations that looked like abandoned debris fields started changing shape. What had once appeared broken and useless now unfolded into structured military formations. Weapon arrays extended. Shields powered on. Navigation systems locked onto coordinates far beyond Earth. On the surface of the planet, people began to notice changes. Military bases that had been closed for years were suddenly active again. Troop movements increased. Supply lines reopened. Emergency alerts appeared on secure channels, but no public explanation was given. Ambassador Paul Grant watched all of this with growing heaviness in his chest. He had not ordered it. He had not even suggested it. But he understood it. Humanity did not react to threats against politics or borders in this way. Not anymore. When he entered the chamber beneath Earth's surface, he saw Admiral Adam Reed already present. That alone told him how serious things had become. Reed rarely left Fleet Command during crises. If he was here, then the situation was already beyond diplomatic repair. Ambassador, Reed said simply. Admiral, Paul replied. Neither smiled. A large holographic display showed fragments of the destroyed convoy. The light of mercy. Ships torn apart. Escape routes cut off. Medical symbols ignored. There was no argument left to make about misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Paul stepped closer to the display. We can still open communication, he said. We can demand accountability. We can involve the Neutral Systems Assembly. Reed looked at him for a long moment before speaking. They targeted medical ships. I understand that, Paul said quietly. No, Reed replied. You don't. Not fully. Silence stretched between them. Around the room, officers stood ready, waiting for commands that had not yet been given but were clearly forming. Paul lowered his voice. If we respond with full force, this could spread beyond control. Other empires will react. Alliances will break. This could become a galactic war. Reed's expression did not change. It already is one, he said. That sentence settled heavily in the room. For a moment, Paul saw something behind Reed's eyes. Not rage. Not fear. Something colder. A decision that had already been made somewhere far away from politics or diplomacy. A decision made the moment the convoy stopped speaking. Across the network, activation reports continued. Fleet groups coming online. Weapons systems charging. Tactical formations forming around Jupiter's shadow zones and lunar orbit platforms. Ships that had been designed not for conquest, but for something worse, response. Paul turned slightly. Where are they going? He asked. Reed did not answer immediately. Then he said, they are waking up everything we never wanted to use. That was the truth no one liked to speak. Humanity had not built its military empire for expansion. It had built it after nearly destroying itself once before in ancient wars. The lesson had been simple: never again be unprepared. The systems had been hidden not out of weakness, but restraint. Now restraint was breaking. In the silence of command centers, orders were finally being prepared. Not declarations. Not warnings. Just movements. Fleet assignments. Strategic positioning. Target identification. The language of response replacing the language of peace. Ambassador Paul Grant looked at the data again. He saw the locations of Varkrith Dominion forces. He saw the confirmed attack points. He saw the destroyed convoy drifting in fragments across space. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was different. Still diplomatic, but no longer uncertain. Silence stretched between them. Around the room, officers stood ready, waiting for commands that had not yet been given but were clearly forming. Paul lowered his voice. If we respond with full force, this could spread beyond control. Other empires will react. Alliances will break. This could become a galactic war. Reed's expression did not change. It already is one, he said. That sentence settled heavily in the room. For a moment, Paul saw something behind Reed's eyes. Not rage. Not fear. Something colder. A decision that had already been made somewhere far away from politics or diplomacy. A decision made the moment the convoy stopped speaking. Across the network, activation reports continued. Fleet groups coming online. Weapons systems charging. Tactical formations forming around Jupiter's shadow zones and lunar orbit platforms. Ships that had been designed not for conquest, but for something worse, response. Paul turned slightly. Where are they going? He asked. Reed did not answer immediately. Then he said, they are waking up everything we never wanted to use. That was the truth no one liked to speak. Humanity had not built its military empire for expansion. It had built it after nearly destroying itself once before in ancient wars. The lesson had been simple: never again be unprepared. The systems had been hidden not out of weakness, but restraint. Now restraint was breaking. In the silence of command centers, orders were finally being prepared. Not declarations. Not warnings. Just movements. Fleet assignments. Strategic positioning. Target identification. The language of response replacing the language of peace. Ambassador Paul Grant looked at the data again. He saw the locations of Varkrith Dominion forces. He saw the confirmed attack points. He saw the destroyed convoy drifting in fragments across space. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was different. Still diplomatic, but no longer uncertain. Silence stretched between them. Around the room, officers stood ready, waiting for commands that had not yet been given but were clearly forming. Paul lowered his voice. If we respond with full force, this could spread beyond control. Other empires will react. Alliances will break. This could become a galactic war. Reed's expression did not change. It already is one, he said. That sentence settled heavily in the room. For a moment, Paul saw something behind Reed's eyes. Not rage. Not fear. Something colder. A decision that had already been made somewhere far away from politics or diplomacy. A decision made the moment the convoy stopped speaking. Across the network, activation reports continued. Fleet groups coming online. Weapons systems charging. Tactical formations forming around Jupiter's shadow zones and lunar orbit platforms. Ships that had been designed not for conquest, but for something worse. Response. Paul turned slightly. Where are they going? He asked. Reed did not answer immediately. Then he said, they are waking up everything we never wanted to use. That was the truth no one liked to speak. Humanity had not built its military empire for expansion. It had built it after nearly destroying itself once before in ancient wars. The lesson had been simple: never again be unprepared. The systems had been hidden not out of weakness, but restraint. Now restraint was breaking. In the silence of command centers, orders were finally being prepared. Not declarations. Not warnings. Just movements. Fleet assignments. Strategic positioning. Target identification. The language of response replacing the language of peace. Ambassador Paul Grant looked at the data again. He saw the locations of Varkrith Dominion forces. He saw the confirmed attack points. He saw the destroyed convoy drifting in fragments across space. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was different. Still diplomatic, but no longer uncertain. Captain Anna Blake stood on the darkened bridge of the stealth vessel called the Night Resolve. The ship did not shine like normal warships. It barely reflected light at all. Its surface was designed to blend into space itself, bending sensors and breaking tracking systems. It was built for silence, for movement without warning, and for endings that came before anyone understood the beginning. Around her, the crew moved without speaking. Every order had already been given before launch. Now there was only execution. Screens glowed softly with shifting data. Enemy positions. Fuel depots. Command stations. Supply lines stretched across the frontier like veins feeding a violent body. Anna's face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She had seen the convoy's final message. She had seen the light of mercy burn. She had seen children's voices cut off mid-sentence. That was not something she forgot. No one on her ship had forgotten it. First target confirmed, a crew member said quietly. Anna nodded once. Begin. There was no countdown. No dramatic announcement. The Night Resolve simply moved. In the darkness between stars, human stealth fleets separated into smaller groups. They did not charge into battle. They did not announce their presence. They slipped through space like thoughts. Like shadows passing over unseen ground. The first target was a Varkrith fuel station hidden inside an asteroid field. It was not heavily defended, because it was not expected to be found. The attackers believed distance and secrecy were enough protection. They were wrong. A small ripple passed through space. Then the station stopped functioning. No explosion was visible from far away. No warning came. One moment it existed. The next, it did not. Fuel lines shut down instantly. Power systems collapsed. Ships docked inside drifted without control. The entire structure became silent debris. Anna watched the readings without emotion. Move to second target, she said. Another crew member responded. Command relay network is down. She did not smile. She did not speak again. They continued. Across the frontier, similar events were unfolding. Varkrith patrol fleets reported missing stations. Communication nodes stopped responding. Entire supply convoys vanished from tracking grids. At first, commanders believed it was system failure. Then sabotage. Then confusion. They did not believe it was war. Not yet. Human ship struck again. This time at a command station orbiting a dead moon. It was heavily defended, filled with officers directing regional operations. Its shields were strong. Its weapons were active. Its sensors scanned constantly for threats. But it never saw the Night Resolve. The human strike came from multiple directions at once. Not loud. Not bright. Just precise interruptions in power, targeting systems, and structural integrity. Within moments, the station went dark. Its defenses never fired a single shot. Inside, alarms triggered. Officers shouted. Systems failed in cascading waves. Then silence returned. The station drifted, broken and lifeless. Fleet after fleet began to disappear from Varkrath control charts. On Earth, deep within a secure communications chamber, Dr. Sarah Hale prepared something very different from war. She stood in front of a wide transmission array, her hands steady but her face tired. Behind her, technicians monitored signal strength across dozens of channels. Across the galaxy, thousands of systems still received humanitarian broadcasts. Medical updates. Peace communications. Emergency aid requests. Now those channels were being used for something else. Sarah stepped forward. "This is Dr. Sarah Hale of the Light of Mercy," she said clearly. Her voice traveled across encrypted medical frequencies, emergency civilian channels, and neutral space networks. These were not military lines. And now, across the stars, those healers had become the reason entire fleets were disappearing without warning. On the night resolve, Anna finally spoke again after a long silence. "Status?" she asked. A technician replied softly. "All primary targets in this region neutralized." Anna looked out at the dark expanse of space. "Good," she said. "Then we move forward." Behind her, Sarah's voice echoed again through the galaxy. "This is not the end of the Light of Mercy," she said. "It is the reason it will never fall again." And in the silence that followed, the galaxy began to understand something it had never truly believed before. Humanity was not reacting. It was responding. Adam Reed stood at the center of the forward command ship as it drifted into position above the Varkrath capital world. The planet below was massive, covered in dark industrial zones, heavy shield grids, and endless military structures. It was not a peaceful world. It was a fortress built to control fear across the region. Now, it was surrounded. Human fleets filled the space around it in silent formation. They did not fire. They did not speak. They simply held position, like a storm waiting for the final moment to break. Every ship was locked onto key systems below, command towers, weapon platforms, orbital defense rings, and communication hubs. Inside the command chamber, Admiral Reed watched the final transmission screen. A message had been sent to the planet's leadership. Surrender those responsible for the attack on the Light of Mercy. Stand down all military systems. Allow evacuation of non-combat zones. There was no reply. Minutes passed. Then hours. Still nothing. Ambassador Paul Grant stood beside Reed, watching the silence stretch longer than anyone wanted. "They are refusing all contact," he said quietly. "Even neutral channels are blocked." Reed nodded once. "Then they have chosen the outcome." Down on the planet, Commander Kane stood inside the Central War Citadel. Around him, his officers reported growing instability. Entire sectors of their network were failing. Defense platforms were going dark one by one. No enemy ships were visible near the surface, but their systems were collapsing anyway. "This is impossible," one officer said. "They cannot be inside our grid." Kane stared at the main display. "They are not inside," he said slowly. "They are everywhere." He had once believed humanity would hesitate. That their response would slow under political pressure. That fear of escalation would keep them controlled. He was wrong. Above the planet, Adam Reed gave the final order. "Begin operation." The human fleets moved. It was not a chaotic attack. It was structured. Precise. Each ship had a target, each strike had purpose. Orbital defense rings were disabled first. Not destroyed completely, but shut down so they could not fire. Power stations feeding planetary shields were taken offline in coordinated pulses. Communication towers went silent across the surface. The capital world did not fall into fire immediately. It fell into isolation. Inside the citadel, alarms screamed as systems failed one after another. Kane watched as his control over the planet disappeared in real time. "They are not attacking randomly," he said. "They are removing our control." On the human fleet, Captain Anna Blake coordinated ground evacuation channels. Her ships opened wide communication paths to civilian sectors on the planet. Messages were broadcast in multiple languages. "All non-military personnel are ordered to move to designated evacuation zones," her voice repeated across the surface. "You will not be harmed. Do not approach military facilities." The galaxy was watching all of it. Alien observers, neutral governments, and trade alliances all focused on the same scene. Humanity was dismantling an entire war machine while simultaneously offering protection to those caught inside it. It was something no one had expected. Not destruction without chaos. Not control without chaos. But control was exactly what it was. Reed watched a tactical map as sectors of the capital world went dark one by one. "How many civilian zones confirmed?" he asked. 70% cleared, a technician replied. "Keep pushing evacuation priority," Reed said. Paul Grant looked at him. "You are removing their entire military structure," he said carefully. "But you are still protecting their population." Reed did not look away from the screen. "We are not them," he said. On the surface, confusion spread. Military units tried to respond but found their systems unresponsive. Weapons failed to lock. Shields did not activate. Transport ships could not launch from certain zones. It was as if the planet itself had been disconnected from war. Commander Kane finally understood what was happening. "They are not trying to beat us in battle," he said slowly. "They are removing the battle entirely." He activated emergency protocols, but even those were blocked. Human cyber systems had already infiltrated the command network. Every response was predicted. Every counter was neutralized before it could begin. For the first time in his life, Kane felt something unfamiliar. Powerlessness. Above the planet, Reed's fleet continued its work. Orbital shipyards that produced warships were shut down without destruction. Fuel depots were drained of usable energy. Weapon manufacturing zones were disabled through precise system interference. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Captain Blake reported from her strike group. "Enemy fleet attempting escape from low orbit." Reed replied calmly. "Allow civilian transports only." Moments later, human ships intercepted escaping military vessels. Not with destruction, but with disabling strikes. Engines failed. Weapons went silent. Hulls drifted into controlled capture zones. The galaxy watched in disbelief. This was not conquest in the traditional sense. There were no burning cities from orbit. No planetary annihilation. Instead, there was total removal of war capability while life continued under strict protection. Ambassador Grant finally spoke again. "This will be remembered," he said. Reed nodded slightly. "It needs to be." Inside the Citadel, Commander Kane received one final transmission from Earth. It was short. "This ends when those responsible are removed from command." He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked at his collapsing systems, his silent fleets, and the unstoppable human presence above his world. For the first time, he understood that survival no longer depended on strength. It depended on surrender. Reed's voice came through all channels one final time. "Stand down," he said. "Or we finish this without you." Silence followed. Then, one by one, Varkrath military systems powered down. Across the capital world, weapons went dark. Command chains dissolved. Ships stopped moving. The war infrastructure that had once ruled with fear now simply ceased to function. But the evacuation continued. Human ships guided civilian transports away from conflict zones. Medical assistance was deployed for injured populations. Relief teams prepared for planetary stabilization. On the command bridge, Paul Grant watched the final reading stabilize. "It's over," he said quietly. Reed looked at the fading display of enemy military networks. "No," he said. "It's just corrected." The silence after the war felt different from the silence before it. Before, it had been fear hiding in the dark between stars. Now, it was exhaustion, confusion, and slowly returning hope. Adam Reed stood on the observation deck of the command ship as it orbited a damaged world. Below him, the surface was scarred but not destroyed. Cities were still standing. Oceans still moved. Clouds still passed through the sky as if nothing had changed in the universe. But everything had changed. The war was over. Not through endless destruction, not through the collapse of all life, but through control, precision, and refusal to target what was innocent. That difference was now written across every report coming in from across the galaxy. Behind him, officers moved quietly. No celebration had been ordered. No victory announcements had been broadcast. There were no loud speeches. Only reports, repairs, and the slow work of stabilizing systems that had been shut down during the conflict. Ambassador Paul Grant stood nearby, watching the same planet. His face looked tired, but calmer than before. "The Neutral Systems Assembly is requesting full reports," he said. "They will get them," Adam replied. "And reactions are already coming in," Paul added. "Some worlds are afraid. Some are grateful. Some do not understand what they just witnessed." Adam did not respond immediately. He understood all three reactions. Fear came from power. Gratitude came from survival. Confusion came from not knowing how both could exist at the same time. Far away from that orbit, Dr. Sarah Hale stood inside a rebuilt medical bay. It was not the same ship she had once served on, the Light of Mercy. That ship was gone. But its purpose was not. She moved through rows of medical equipment being installed by human and alien engineers working side by side. The design was different now. Larger fleets of healing ships were being constructed, not just for humans, but for every species affected by the war. There were no restrictions anymore. No hesitation about who could be treated. No debates about origin or allegiance. If someone was wounded, they would be helped. Sarah stopped for a moment and looked at a group of engineers adjusting a life support system designed for a species she had never treated before. They asked her questions. She answered simply. Not as a soldier. Not as a symbol. But as a doctor. "We do not choose who deserves to live," she said quietly. "We only choose to act." Those words spread through the reconstruction fleets. On multiple worlds, damaged infrastructure was being repaired. Human ships worked alongside former enemy systems, now repurposed for civilian use. Energy grids were restored. Communication networks reopened. Food distribution routes were rebuilt. The galaxy, which had once been on the edge of collapse, began to function again. But something deeper was changing too. Across the stars, stories spread about what had happened. Not just about the battle, but about how it was fought. Entire fleets removed without destroying cities. Weapons disabled instead of detonated. Evacuations carried out even while war continued above them. It did not fit the old expectations of war. In a quiet chamber on Earth, Adam Reed reviewed final casualty reports. The number of civilian losses was far lower than any major interstellar conflict in history of that scale. Still, every loss mattered. Every name was recorded. Every system failure analyzed. Paul Grant entered the room and placed a file on the table. "The Varkrith remnants are requesting peace talks," he said. Adam looked at the file. "They will accept the terms." "You are certain?" Paul asked. Adam nodded. "They understand now." Outside the chamber, Earth's orbit was filled with construction fleets. New ships were being built, but not for conquest. They were being designed for response, protection, and medical support. Entire sections of the fleet were dedicated to humanitarian missions alone. Sarah Hale's new command ship, called the Horizon Care, was launched during that time. It was larger than any medical vessel before it. It carried research labs, treatment bays, and mobile recovery zones capable of serving multiple species at once. When she boarded it, there was no ceremony. She simply walked through the corridors, checking equipment, speaking with crew members, and ensuring that every system was ready for its purpose. One young technician asked her, "Do you think it will happen again?" Sarah paused. She did not answer quickly. Then she said, "Not if we remember why it happened." Across the galaxy, former enemies watched humanity differently now. Some feared it more than before. Not because of destruction, but because of restraint. Because of what it meant when a civilization capable of overwhelming force chose not to erase entire worlds. Others began to understand something new. That humanity did not fight to expand. It fought to protect what it considered sacred. And among those things, the safety of healers had become absolute. On a distant world, Commander Kane, now no longer a commander, stood among the ruins of his former command structure. He had not been killed. He had not been imprisoned. He had been allowed to live in a world that was no longer under his control. He watched human engineers repair damaged systems in the city nearby. He saw injured civilians being treated without question. He saw former soldiers from his own forces working alongside human crews to rebuild infrastructure. He finally understood the scale of what had happened. Not defeat through annihilation, but defeat through replacement. Adam Reed returned to the bridge one final time before standing down full command. The fleet around him was no longer in battle formation. It was in escort formation for relief operations. Paul stood beside him. "What now?" he asked. Adam looked out at the stars. "Now," he said, "we make sure there is nothing left to defend against this kind of mistake again." The fleet shifted into motion, not toward war, but toward rebuilding damaged systems across multiple sectors. Medical fleets deployed. Relief stations activated. Communication relays reopened across broken regions of space. Sarah's voice, carried through civilian networks, reached more systems every day. "We are still here," she said in one broadcast. "And we are still healing." That message traveled farther than any weapon ever had. And slowly, the galaxy learned the final truth of the conflict. Humanity did not protect healers because they were weak. It protected them because it remembered what happens when healers are not protected. And in that memory, it had found both its mercy and its unstoppable force.